welcome back. In this lesson we're going to look at spawning our character, make sure he has the correct position and rotation in the world. So before I went over the last lesson, but I'll do it now quickly just to demonstrate what we're doing. So if we go over to the house and we enter, and now if we exit again, instead of spawning right in front of the door, we spawn right back at the world origin. We don't want that. So before we proceed, I want to fix a few things from the last episode, a few updates. Number one is we want to change the button input to enter the house to triangle or Y just to match the game. So if we go to our scene constants, scene handler, and I think actually it's in our player controller. Yep, so we need to change this now to A input to Y input pressed. I also want to change the orientation of the house just so it kind of matches the camera. So we go to our scenes, go to the house, let's focus in on it. Let's simply just rotate this 180 degrees on the Y. We're going to have to reposition our camera. We want our player standing near the door, and then our camera, we'll bring this forward. I think that looks better. Save that. Let's go back now and let's test what this looks like when we enter. Now we're changing our input now to what Y is. Yep, that looks better. That seems more natural. And now we fix this issue. First thing we're going to do is go to our scripts. Let's create a new folder and call it spawning. Let's create a new script. We'll call this spawn point. Now, in here we're going to have a few variables. So let's say public string spawn point ID. So this will be the spawn point that actually the player spawns in when they exit to the next scene. We also will probably want to get the position and rotation. We can get that through the transform, but let's just make it easier here. So public vector3 position, and then we're gonna have a get, and the get is basically gonna return the transform.position. We'll do the same for our rotation, so public quaternion for our rotations, and then rotation equals get return transform.rotation. Great. Delete these as well. Now another change that I wanted to do that I just remember now is in our camera. This will come up later, but we can fix this now. What we essentially want to do is set the camera's position and rotation to be the same as the player's when this camera is initialized, because at the moment, if we were to move our player, then press play, the camera has to move to the new position. We'd have to move the camera as well if we want to make changes in the scene. So let's fix that. So we can simply say transform dot position equals follow target dot position, follow target dot position, and then for our rotation, this should be equals not minus. For our rotation, then that's actually handled by the look angle. So we simply set that as look angle equals follow target dot transform dot rotation dot Euler angles Y, and that should be it. Let's test this. If we go back to our game, if we move our player again, press play, the camera now starts in that position. Okay, so now we've got our spawn point created. The next thing we're going to do is create a spawn manager. So let's go back, their folder, create a new C# script, spawn manager. And we're actually going to make this a singleton. So public static spawn manager instance. Let's give us a capital I, and then of course on awake we're going to say if instance. See, there's some accent there on the I. So if instance is equal to null, so it hasn't been defined, then we could simply say instance equals this. But if instance is not null, then we want to destroy this game object. So destroy game object. So now when we switch scenes, we want to register a spawn point ID before we exit the scene. So we'll capture that here. So we public string next spawn point ID. Let's just default it to an empty string. Let's just hide this in the inspector as well because we don't want to edit this. An inspector. So now let's look at our logic for this. We want this script to produce a spawn point given the ID. So let's go public. Now this is, we're going to return a spawn point, the new object we created. We'll call this get next spawn point. And if our next spawn point ID is equal to this, then we can simply return null. Also, let's just return null to the bottom just for some safety. Now the way we'll find the spawn points in the scene is through tags. So we'll say game objects, create an array, call it spawn point, and that'll be equal to game object dot find game object. Make sure there's an S in there so we get the array back with tag, and then we'll have it in the spawn tag. So let's just make the spawn tag a variable. So we'll say serialize, and it'll be a string spawn tag, and we'll just put that into here. Cool. Now for each of the spawn points in the spawn points array, so maybe we can rename this spawn point object, so obj. We're going to capture the spawn point component, so we'll say spawn point next spawn point equals spawn point, so not spawn points, it should be this one, spawn point dot get component spawn point. And then if this isn't null, if it's not equal to null, then we're going to check if next spawn point dot the ID, what's it called again, spawn point ID equals the next spawn point ID. Then what we're going to do is return the next spawn point. We also want to reset this because we want this to be empty most of the time. So just before we change levels, we will reset this. So let's just say next spawn point ID equals empty. And we can add some debugging here as well. So if we didn't find the spawn point in the scene, debug.log error, we'll say could not find, and then let's just add in the spawn point, so next spawn point ID. We'll also reset the spawn point here as well, or the spawn point ID. Great, that looks good. Let's delete these, don't need them. Now if we go back to our game, we're actually going to attach this to the scene constants. So if you remember here, the scene handler has this line saying do not destroy this game object on load. So we don't need to add this line to this script because it's already covered in this one. So we'll call the spawn manager here, and we'll leave the spawn tag. We'll have to set this in a second. So let's actually create our first spawn point. So create empty spawn point, and this will have the spawn point on it, the game object. Now the spawn point ID, we're going to leave blank for this because this house scene only has one spawn point, and it's just where you load in the level in the game. So we can leave that the way it is. Let's just reset our points here, and let's add the tag. So add tag, add spawn point, go back, tag, spawn point. Let's create a prefab with this before we move on. Let's move the spawn point over here to the door, and This is going to control the rotation as well. So let's rotate this. So yeah, we need to, oh, that's fine actually. It's going to be minus 90. I think the blue should be the forward, yeah, so let's just see minus 90. Now, the mechanism for actually spawning our player is going to be a little less obvious. The kind of obvious thing to do would be to collect the spawn point data and then just say player.transform.position equals spawn point.position. But I've come into some errors while testing this where it's not always consistent. Sometimes he would spawn here, but also sometimes he would spawn way over here. I think it's something to do with the world calculations for the world points. They're scheduled at different times at the startup of a scene, and it causes some translation errors. So instead, what we're going to do is instantiate our character at the point, which has some benefits as well, because let's say our game has multiple characters like Simpson Hit Run does. Let's say we're playing as Bart and we're not always playing as our main character Homer, but we still have Homer in the scene. Instead of having multiple versions of characters in the scene, we can have one in the scene for prototyping, debugging, testing, but we actually would play the game then. Who we play as should be dynamic. So let's go to our game manager. So game constant, game manager. Let's open up this. Now let's just collect our spawn point. So spawn point equals spawn manager dot instance dot get next spawn point. And then if this isn't null, then we're going to spawn our player. But of course, we already have our player in this scene. So we'll say if player is not equal to null, then we're going to want to destroy our player. Destroy the game object. So player.game object. And then we want our players to make sure the variable is null. We'll say player equals null. Then we're going to spawn our player. Let's create a function for that. Void spawn player. And of course that's going to take in a spawn point. So spawn point. And our player variable will now be the instantiated. Now we're going to have to collect our player prefab in here. So let's just create an open variable here for our prefab, serialized field, game object, player prefab. Go back down. We want to spawn our player prefab. Then we're also going to spawn him at the spawn point position and also our spawn point rotation. So the error is, yeah, so this is going to be the game object. We actually need the component for this. So dot get component. And then of course it's going to be the player controller. This line looks a bit big. Let's just put this in the next line. And let's call this up here now. So spawn player at the spawn point. Now our third person camera, if we remember, needs a follow target. And we set this through the inspector, but that's not going to work here. So let's just make this public. And then in our game manager again, we'll say here, third person camera dot follow target equals our player dot transform. Now let's just add this check as well, because again, not every scene will have a camera. Great. So let's see if we can set this all up and start testing. So this spawn point actually will have a spawn ID. We're going to call this house front. And then let's just take this, save. Also we need to go to our game manager and get our player prefab. So players here. Let's make sure we have all these. Apply all. If we go now to our game manager, we go prefabs, player, Go game constants and we apply all. Now if we change scenes to the house, yes, save scene. If we look at our door, it has the door script. It has the scene name. Let's also add what we want the next spawn point to be. That will be added here. So public string exit spawn point ID. And then when we go to load scene, so let's go to our scene manager, scene handler. Let's just see where our load scene is being called. Find all references. What's happening here? We can say scene handler.instance load scene. And maybe just before that, we can say spawn manager dot instance dot next spawn ID equals door dot exit spawn ID. And if we go back to our game, this door is going to be our house front for the ID. Now, not every door is going to need this, like the door on the other level. As I mentioned, there's only one spawn point in this building, so we can just leave that the way it is. Let's go back now to our other scene and let's see if this works. Let's walk up to the house, let's go to enter. That works fine. Now if we go out again. Okay, so we got one error. Let's see what it is. The tag name is empty, so we didn't fill out that. Scene constants, tag name, if you remember, it's spawn point. So let's just fill that in. Now, let's try this again. Go to the house, enter. Let's see our new error. So here's our issue. We're calling our player in net, but then we're deleting our player, and then we're not calling the net on our new player. Let's just move that line down to here. Okay, and let's try this again and exit. Let's see what our new error is now. So this error is actually coming from our virtual camera we've got attached to our third person camera. So as we can see here in the camera, we need a look at target for our collider. So very simply, let's go to our third person camera. Let's capture the virtual camera. So it's going to be type Cinemachine virtual camera. Let's just call this vcam. And then we'll say vcam equals get component and children virtual camera. Get component and children will go recursively down through the child game objects until it finds the component it's looking for. Even though the script is on the third person camera object, this will go down through the pivot, through the camera holder and find this. Then we're going to simply just say vcam dot look at equals follow target, and that's it. Let's try this again. So there we go. Seems to be working. We spawn where we want to do, but I just see one error there. Not an error, there's no bug, but the camera spawns behind our player. That's what we want by default, but in this situation, I think I want the camera to spawn in front of the player once we leave a house. It may not be that for every spawn point. Maybe some spawn points we want the camera to be right behind the player as normal. But for exiting a building like this, I want the camera to be in front. So, very easy fix. Let's go back to our spawn point and let's just create a boolean. Say public bool camera in front. That's the default to true. Now if we go back to our third person camera and let's just add a little boolean public bool look at front. We'll set this when we spawn the player, if we spawn the player. And then after we set the position, so here let's just say if we do not look at front, then we just set the look angle to this. But if we do, the look angle will equal the same thing, but this time it will be minus. Now if we go to our game manager, of course, we spawn the player if the spawn point is not null. So at this point as well, we can say if third person camera is not null, then third person camera dot look at front equals spawn point dot camera in front. And we shouldn't have to change anything in the inspectors here because by default this will be camera in front. So let's try this again. And let's exit. And there we go. We see our camera spawned in front of the player, looking at the player. Let's go back in, test again. And there we go. So that'll be it for this lesson. In the next one, we're going to go back and look at some NPC logic. So stay tuned, and thanks for watching.